morning, Facebook. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I've been convicted more recently to talk about something that's fairly popular now, but not a lot of people who are experiencing this really have anyone to talk to or have an open dialogue with, or any information on how to deal with interacting with people who are narcissistic in nature, carnally described as narcissistic. So this is for the individuals who may be secretly dealing with an individual who has narcissism, who is just suffering in secret, and no one knows it because the circumstance was set up for you to be pulled away from loved ones and individuals around you that would know something is going on in your life and you're functioning differently than what you normally would. So this is addressed to anyone who's looking for answers, looking for closure, trying to understand what it is you're actually dealing with, because there's really not a lot of information out here on it. There's some vague carnal sort of explanations, but there's no real actual explanation out here. And so I figured I'd take some time to share the information that I know based on my experiences and those around me. So, first and foremost, mental illness. I'm going to give sort of a precursor. We are taught that mental illness needs to be prescribed with pharmaceutical medication. But the reality of the situation is most mental illness is not rooted in the mind. You must understand that we are spirit man, and the flesh part of us is a culmination of something that is rooted in a spiritual place. That being stated, any illness of the mind in most cases is rooted in some form of spiritual contamination or spiritual dysfunction or spiritual attack. Now, we are taught that pharmaceutical medicine is the solution to mental illness. The diagnosis of mental illness is a carnal approach to trying to understand something that really is not rooted in a carnal, physical sort of situation. If you ever want to get to the root of anything, you have to go to the root. Diagnosing someone with mental illness and prescribing them medicine is like having a issue with your engine in your car and you just turning off the check engine light and never really dealing with the root that is turning the check engine light on in the first place. That would be my easiest way to, in an analogy, explain what's going on. So keep that in mind. Oh, and one more thing. The reason pharmaceutical medicine has some impact on people with mental illness, if you look in the Bible, pharma, and what I mean by pharmakia in the Bible is witchcraft. It is, sorry, I had a phone call come through. Pharma in the Bible, pharmakia, is described as witchcraft. It is taking anything in nature and manipulating the molecular structure of this thing found in nature to use it to alter the mind or alter the body in a very unnatural sense. And a lot of pharmaceutical really suppresses your spirit. Drugs do the same thing. Drugs can suppress your spirit or your spiritual protection to allow intrusion. Historically, things like smoking different herbs and things were used in incantation in order to allow for demonic possession. It's a very dark and demonic thing that occurs, and we do it recreationally in a modern sense because we don't know the history attached to it. So I'm giving you these sort of things because, listen, pharmaceutical can temporarily tame the demon that is behind the mental illness, but it's only temporary, which is why you have to continue taking pharmaceutical in order to see consistent sort of suppression of the symptoms rooted in mental illness from a spiritual contamination. All that to say that pharmaceutical is not the cure. It is turning off the check engine light without addressing the engine issue. All right, so now that I have stated that sort of foundation, let's look at narcissism. All right, so where does it come from? Well, in the Bible, you hear the term familiar spirit. So now I have to address what familiar spirits are and where they came from. Now, we're not taught this in modern church because we tend not to be educated on the fact that we don't have the entire text of the children of Israel. We have 66 of the books. And so when you read the 66 books, you hear about things like Enoch in the Old Testament being taken and walking with God for 300 years. Nothing else really said about it in Genesis. It's alluded to in the book of the prophets in the Old Testament, but you don't really get a fervent detail on who this character is, why he was taken, why he walked with God, what happened when he walked with God. That's one. All right. It seems like I'm jumping around, but I'm really not. I'll bring it all full circle in a second. All right. So, you hear about Nephilim giants in the Old Testament, but you're not really taught who they are, where they came from, why they were here. It's mentioned in Genesis, but there's really no detail as to what or why or how. This information has been conveniently excluded. And either the Apocrypha books, which was in the original King James 1611 Bible, which was removed after slavery, or the Pseudeographa books, which were recovered in the Kremlin caves in the 1830s, which the Catholics concealed altogether. And I'll go into another conversation later as to why certain books were excluded from the Bible, because there is a very definitive reason why they were. But for today, in context, we're talking about narcissism. So, where am I going with all of this? Familiar spirits. Let's talk about where familiar spirits are rooted, where they come from. So, remember I mentioned there were books in the Bible that were excluded. And remember I mentioned Enoch being taken and walking with God for 300 years as is mentioned in Genesis. Remember how I mentioned that there were Nephilim giants mentioned in Genesis, but you don't get any other information on it. All right. So, let's start tying together some knots here to bring this full circle. When you read the book of Jasher, Jasher was not a person. Jasher means the journal of the righteous. Let me back up one. We are taught that there was no written language before the flood and before Egypt. That is a lie. What you will find reading the lost text is that writing didn't even start on earth. On earth as it is in heaven. Writing started in heaven. On earth as it is in heaven. Writing has been here since the beginning of mankind. The book of Jasher is the full story of Genesis without all the cut downs. The book of Jubilees is another book that is the story of creation from the beginning. But the vantage point of Jubilees is the understanding of God's system of time. All right. So we'll go into that another day because there's a lot of information with that. Pursuant to what we're talking about, the book of Jasher, there's a book of Enoch. The book of Enoch explains when Enoch was, translated spiritually and walked with God for 300 years, what he experienced, what he saw, what he wrote down, what he was instructed to journal in order to teach mankind at a later point. So, Nephilim giants. What is written in the book of Enoch explains that there were a faction of messengers or angels or angelic beings placed in a position to watch over mankind in our earlier development. And God gave them very specific instruction on how to interact with us. There's a part in Enoch where it is explained that God is telling these angels, like, look, I need you to watch over the humans. Make sure you don't teach them certain things. I don't need you to teach them how to make reflections of themselves, vanity. I don't need you to teach them how to beautify their eyelids, vanity. I need you to teach them, not teach them how to make weaponry and armor, greed and conquering. I need you not to teach them how to mine certain minerals in the earth and precious stones, greed. I need you to make sure you do not teach them the understanding of autonomy, the understanding of astrology, not astronomy, astrology. It's not for humans. Not to say it doesn't have a function. It was never for us to use. We'll allude to that in a second. And above all else, you are not to take human form in order to lay with the women of men to bear a child. It is an abomination to the humans. It is an abomination to you, angels. So a pact of them decided to do it anyway. They made a pact on a mountain. If I'm not mistaken, Mount Hermon is where these angels made a pact and say, you know what? We find these human women attractive. We're going to do it anyway. And if we get caught, we all going down. And they did. They took human women, wives, and they bare these children, which were an abomination. They were hybrid. What you'll find later is that the Greeks called them demigods, titans. That's where the narrative of the gods and demigods came from. It is the worship of fallen angels and their children. It is the same story that was told in Babylon. It is the same story that was told in Egypt. It is the exact same story. The reason why it has different names and these fallen angels have different names in different societies is because once languages were confounded at the Tower of Babel, and the languages were split into, I believe it's 40 different tongues. It may be 70, forgive me if I don't remember, but I believe the languages were split into 40 different tongues according to Jasher. It was 40 angels sent to split the tongues into 40 different languages. When that happened, you had 40 different titlings for the fallen angels. So in different societies, like India, Shiva, you know, you just have a plethora of different names for these fallen angels. The Aztec had their names for them. The Sumerian tablets with the Anunnaki are fallen angels. It's this knowledge that a lot of the knowledge that we of things that seem unhumanly advanced. It's because it is advanced. It wasn't ours. The reason certain societies have such advancements that we still can't understand to this day is because they had assistance. It wasn't extraterrestrial. It was extra dimensional. But I'm jumping the gun here. So word got back to heaven that these watchers disobeyed God. God was furious. And when I say furious, I need you to understand, God doesn't have the same level of compassion and understanding and grace with these angels as he does with us. Why? Probably because they understand things to a greater understanding or to a grander scale than humans do. Now, the way that I like to imagine it is these angels by comparison would be like our big brothers and sisters. They've been around the block a little longer. They're like teenagers. We're like the infant species. And so you tell your teenage child, make sure your little brother or sister doesn't get a knife in their hand. You put it in their hand. You're a little irritated with your 2-year-old, but you're more irritated with your teenager because you knew the teenager knew better on a level that the 2-year-old didn't. That's kind of how I look at the relationship between God and the angels and God and us. And so, back to the story. Word got back to the Most High that these angels disobeyed them, they don't get second chances like we do. They don't get grace like we do. God dealt with them. There was a dialogue that he sent spiritually through Enoch, because Enoch at one point came back to earth and was in communion with these fallen angels, who they realized that word got back to heaven and they were terrified. And so they sent a petition through Enoch to speak to the Most High on their behalf, asking for forgiveness. And the Most High was like, nah, y'all know better. And y'all knew better on a level they didn't. There is no petition. And then God has this dialogue spiritually through Enoch to the angels, saying basically, look, you don't come from earth. You come from a place where you don't need to reproduce, where you lived eternally. But since you want to be like the humans and live among them and disobey me and take human women, wives, and bury these abominations in the earth, fine. Now you're going to be bound there. Since you wanted to live like them, I'm going to bind you there. I'm going to strip you of your ability to operate in spiritual and fleshly form. You're bound in spirit to the earth until 70 generations of your likeness, when judgment day will occur. Now, I don't know what the generation of an L is, or one of the high-ranking angels. Most of them, their names end in L. Raphael, Michael, just all of their names end in L. It's some sort of hierarchy on the angelic end. But whatever the situation is, he dealt with them. He said, you're going to be bound in the earth spiritually until judgment day, and you will be known as evil and demonic spirits. That's how the spirits got here. All right. So we came the long way because I wanted to be able to explain to you how these 6,000+ year old demonic spirits got here. And they're bound here until their judgment. It's that simple. You don't want to believe it? Fine. That's the situation. So these Nephilim giants, their offspring, the Greeks called them titans or demigods. They were slain and their spirits were bound in the earth as well. After the flood, the flood. Jasher will tell you, Genesis does not. Jasher will tell you that there were a sum of almost 400,000 giants in the earth before the flood came. Some of them actually survived the flood. And if you go to Deuteronomy and you Google a character in Deuteronomy name is Og, O-G. Og was one of the giants that survived the flood. They hid in some pockets in the mountains or something during the flood. Some of the giants survived the flood, and that's why God sent Moses on an extermination hunt of certain tribes post-flood to wipe out the remaining abomination. Whole nother conversation for another day. At any rate, and I know I'm giving you a lot, but I like to explain the backstory on things so we understand what we're actually dealing with. All right, so now you know where the giants came from. Now you know what Enoch was doing. Now you know how demonic spirits got here. And just to addendum slightly, after the flood, and this is to prove there was writing before the flood. After the flood, one of the grandchildren of Ham, which was the youngest son of Noah, of the 3 sons, came across some angelic writing that was left prior to the flood, with knowledge that really humans shouldn't be dealing in. And that birthed the building or the expansion of what would later be known as Babylon, using fallen angel knowledge that we should not have had access to. Same thing with Egypt. Same thing with most great societies of this world that have this super technologically advanced sort of circumstance. What comes with that technological advancement is perversion. Fallen angels and the enemy of God basically taking something that they didn't create and using it out of its natural context. Whole nother conversation for another day. For right now, let's stick with where we are. So, you have these demons. They've been here for a very long time. They've watched humans for a very long time. They know how we operate. And just like humans have tendencies, so do these characters. They have tendencies. In the Bible, they're known as familiar spirits for a reason. Guess what familiar spirit we're going to talk about today? We're going to talk about the familiar spirit that is known as Leviathan in the Bible, aka the narcissism spirit. Now, narcissism is the carnal description of it in a fleshly sense, but it is actually spiritually rooted. And when you read the Bible and read about Leviathan, Leviathan is a sea creature, a massive sea creature, which is described as basically wrapping himself around a victim to a point where it's just suffocating and the victim cannot get free. And so we're going to stop there and jump to the other side of this, which deals with a person who has Leviathan attached to them and what you're going to experience. So, you meet someone with a narcissistic spirit. You're not going to know it right away. Why? A person with a narcissistic spirit, they spiritually will conceal their true nature for no less than 90 days. You won't see certain things manifest to 4 or 5 months, but typically 90 days. This person, because of that spirit on them, they sit back and they're going to just listen to you. They're going to listen to you talk. They're going to listen to the things you're interested in. They're going to learn. They study you. They are studying you, because what they're going to do is show you a reflection of yourself as them to get you to buy into this environment or this situation they have made for you. And it is encapsulating. You fall deeply in love, so to speak, because it is a dream come true. This deep connection, this person that you know, they were made for you. They know you so well. And it's euphoric. It is nothing less than euphoric when you experience it. But you're not really experiencing the person. You're experiencing something that they created. An environment, a character, a circumstance. They're selling you on a situation that is not real. It does not represent them. All right? And so for 90 days, they're going to get you to a place where your guard is completely down. Once your guard is down, then they're going to slowly start to reveal their true nature, or the true tendency of this spirit that's attached to them. I'll be fair and say it's not their true nature. It's the attachment to them that they're not really addressing. They slowly but surely start taking you through this roller coaster sort of scenario. It'll be a peaceful situation. Then they'll just sabotage and create a conflict. Then they'll create a situation where it resolves. Constantly. Conflict, resolve. Conflict, resolve. Conflict, resolve. And after a while, you're going to start to feel like you're going crazy. You're not going to know how to feel. And the thing is, you can really compare it to a heroin buzz, because they say with heroin, the first high you get, you're constantly chasing that high the rest of your life. Narcissism is very similar. You are so encapsulated by that high they gave you in the beginning, which was false, that you're sitting around waiting for it to resolve and be that indefinitely, but it never will be. It was just set up. You were set up. You were set up. And this spirit uses a person to set you up. Now, what are some characteristics of people who have this spirit attached to them? They're very charismatic. They pay close attention to detail. They are excellent liars, to the point that you may not ever even catch them. To the point, and you have to understand, they're being spiritually, supernaturally assisted with their deceptions and lies. So it's almost inhuman, because humans are not that clean with their lies. Understand what you're dealing with. You're dealing with someone that has a spiritual attachment to them that's working in them. And so you may end up breaking free of someone with a narcissistic spirit, and you may never figure out some of the lies and things that they've placed in front of you. You may never figure it out. That's a possibility. And I'm just throwing that out there, Because a lot of times it'll be hard for you to gather closure if you have certain questions that have never been answered. And you have to know that that's part of the ploy. That's part of it. These spirits have been around for a very long time. And this familiar spirit is one of the most effective in Satan's minion, so to speak. So, characteristics of people with narcissism. A lot of them tend to be very vain. They're self-centered. They have to always have eyes on them. They care a lot about what people think about them. They have a fixation and an obsession a lot of times with money, with success. They have over-embellished perspectives on self-image, like super inflated self-perspectives. But ironically, they're extremely insecure. They question themselves a lot. These are the things that they, like the things that they show you are a inverse of the things that they actually struggle with internally. The conflicts they have internally, they show you the opposite in an extreme fashion. And I can describe someone with the spirit, and someone who has experienced someone with narcissism will be like, oh my God, this is exactly what I've seen or dealt with. Because that familiar spirit is not going to change from person to person that it attaches itself to. That's why it's familiar. It functions the same way in every person, or very similarly. And so, the people, they tend to be restless. Their mind is never at peace. It's never calm. And how did this spirit attach itself to them? You might ask. 9 times out of 10, they dealt with something post-traumatic, or something traumatic in their youth, a disheartening traumatic situation. It could be rape. It could be anything. If they were a young child, a lot of times it happens from a loved one who has the same spirit on them, and it's handed down, unfortunately. And you must know that the enemy works best in you when you have spiritual holes in you. And what I mean by that is you have unforgiveness is the main way that the enemy will attack you. Unforgiveness. If you have unforgiveness and things that are unresolved and that have not been spoken to, that is the entry point for demonic interaction with your spirit. And unfortunately, people who deal with this, they've never patched up those holes. And the spirit of Leviathan, when it attaches itself to a victim, it makes them extremely prideful, which makes it very difficult for them to come to terms with the fact that they have the spirit attached to them. They will be fully convinced that every thought that enters their mind, which most of it is not their own device, but most of the thoughts that enter their mind are of their own devices. They are fully convinced. And they will, the spirit will rationalize inside of their mind, oh, you're just special. You're just different. No one's going to understand you. This is just how you are. And it's because you're so special and different, and you have such a grandiose purpose that no one's going to really understand why you function the way you are. What that's doing is it's indoctrinating the person that they're above reproof or correction. It's a supernatural positioning to prevent them from ever thinking they even need to be healed. They don't believe they need to be healed. Belief equals behavior. So this demon attacks your mind to have your belief system set in a certain thing so that you will never go and even try to get help. You won't even consider it. And anyone who's dealt with a narcissist will tell you it is virtually impossible to correct them. If you try to correct them, or if you corner them in the fact that they're wrong, they will go into what is called narcissistic rage. They will start trying to take any information they have about you and attack you. They will psychologically attack you. The men who have it might physically attack you. Men tend to be abusive. Women tend to be more so mentally and emotionally abusive. when they have this spirit attached to them. You know, and so you have to be mindful of these things. You're dealing with someone who has a 6,000 plus year old pissed off Nephilim spirit demon attached to them. Sounds crazy, but that's what it is. And that's why it's so effective at encapsulating a victim, and why it's so effective at attacking you through this thing, getting you to drop your guard and opening your heart emotionally to attack you, to bring you to your knees, to pull you away from all your family members and loved ones, so it can wreak havoc on you in secrecy and in private. And anyone who's watching this video who is attached to a narcissist, you already know what I'm talking about. Chances are you haven't talked to any of your friends or loved ones in quite some time, either because they have manipulated you to a point where you've willingly pulled yourself away from people, or they have threatened you, and as a result you don't talk to people, or a combination of the two. You know, and so a lot of the victims of narcissists tend to be people who are codependent, people who have a heart that desires to heal, or desires to help, or desires to see someone through struggle, long suffering. You have the heart of love in the Bible, where you're willing to bear long suffering. But you got to understand, these demons know scripture too. And so they're going to use these things against you. What am I suggesting? I'm suggesting this. If these people don't want the help for themselves, you can't help them. Not unless you are versed in casting out demons. Can't help them. They got to, they're going to have to help themselves. They're going to have to be, in order for that spirit to come up out of them, they have to mentally be willing to beat the spiritual addiction attached to them. They have to make that choice. You can't make that for them. You can't. And it's very sad, because a lot of you genuinely love that person despite that spirit being attached to them. And the enemy knows that. And so a lot of people can describe narcissism and the characteristics, but a lot of people cannot openly describe the demon behind the veil. Leviathan. That is the demon behind narcissism. It can't be fixed with medication. It is a spiritually rooted thing. The only thing that will allow a person to free themselves of this spirit, and very few actually do what is necessary to see this, is being baptized in the name of Yeshua Mashiach. Why being baptized in the name of Yeshua Mashiach as opposed to Jesus Christ? Here's why. As I mentioned early on, there are Bible books that were excluded for a very specific reason. One of those books is Jasher. In the book of Jasher and in the book of Jubilees, it explains to you a couple things. Number one, when God spoke and things were in the earth, he spoke in Hebrew. We're not taught that. You're not going to see that in the 66 book Bible. The Most High, Ahaya Asha Ahaya, he created the earth speaking Hebrew and things were. There's another scripture that tells you the power, the spiritual power, and the power in this earth is speaking Hebrew. That is the language of power. Paleo Hebrew is the language of power. When you stop and think about why God decided to take a peculiar people, the children of Israel, and separate them from the rest of the world who was operating in wickedness, separate them to be a light to all people and all nations, keeping God's original construct and laws, they were allowed to speak Hebrew. At the Tower of Babel, when the languages were confounded, all the other people were given other tongues, speaking languages with lesser power. This is not a coincidence. And so in order to have this spirit removed, a person would have to confess their sins and basically have the understanding of why they're being baptized, have an open heart to truly renew their mind and be baptized in the name of Yeshua Mashiach. Not any other thing. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the name Jesus Christ doesn't have some sort of power or some sort of construct. What I'm telling you is the complete power is in the Hebrew, according to Scripture. That's what it is. Take it or leave it. But for those who are dealing with someone, married to someone, have children with someone who has this narcissistic spirit attached to them, you have to stay prayed up. It's a heavy burden. I already know what you're dealing with, even if nobody else does. And a lot of people are dealing with this secretly and ashamed to even talk about it. Some are being abused physically. Some are being abused emotionally. Some are being contorted mentally. And it gets to a point where you start to feel like you're going crazy. They will have you fully convinced that you're the crazy one. And a lot of times they will tell you, you need to be checked out. You need to, something's mentally wrong with you. Oh, everything that they learn about you, they will use against you. It all serves a purpose. But again, you have to understand, this person has a demonic attachment to them. So even your bitterness towards that person, you have to let that go. Otherwise, that spirit can take you on too. You have to let the bitterness attached to the person go, and you have to understand it is not the person, it is the spirit attached to them. Now, that doesn't mean you sit in that situation. That means you understand that you have to remove yourself and emotionally, spiritually, and mentally heal. And understand that person has to get help for themselves if they want it. If they don't, you have to love yourself. You can't love someone more than you love yourself, because then you'll be incapable of loving them. You have to understand that. And whoever I'm speaking to today, who's watching this, who's dealing with that, because I know this is going to reach someone who's dealing with this. You're going to have to walk away. You're going to have to walk away, and you're going to have to make that decision at some point. And you're going to have to be prepared that some of your questions will never be answered, that they may never want to get help, and that they may never change. Pray for them. Get yourself in order. Walk away. If it's meant to be, if God will work on them, and this spirit is removed at some point later, but for the time being, you got to do what you got to do for yourself. They're being used as a weapon to try to destroy you. There's really nothing else. There's really nothing else to be said. There's really nothing else to be said. The picture they painted for you in the beginning, it was calculated. And you fell in love with that picture, that idea. What they're doing is not love. You're going to have to walk away. On my page, you will find a complete description of the symptoms, of the root of where this comes from, outlined in detail. Please feel free to come to my page. It's public, and check it out. Ask any questions you might have. I've had some experience with this. I've had quite a few friends who have experienced this as well. And there's not a lot of people out there that is speaking about this from the spiritual root. Everyone can describe what it is from a carnal perspective. Everyone can tell you, the characteristics or what they do, but no one can tell you the root of it. The root is a spiritual thing. It is spiritual. It is a spiritual contamination. No medicine can heal it. Something that starts in the spirit has to be fixed and amended in the spirit. It is not a fleshly thing. You cannot save a person carnally. It is not a carnal thing. We battle with principalities. This world has a whole spiritual aspect of it that is constantly a battlefield, at war, all around you. Your spirit is in that realm and in this realm. Physically, you're in this realm, so you can't see into that realm. Some people do drugs and they can see into that realm because drugs open you up spiritually to take away your defenses, to allow certain intrusions, which is why you shouldn't really even be doing drugs like that. You ever wonder why, alcohol and spirits? That's not a coincidence. The Bible tells you that it's okay to drink wine in moderation. Strong drink, however, is something different. That is delving in alchemy, which is something we're not supposed to be dealing in, because it allows you to be opened up, your defenses to drop. It's a spiritual thing. A lot of things I'm going to start talking about that I was reluctant to talk about in the past. A lot of things that I understand, that I've been taught, that have been revealed to me spiritually. I'm going to start having these conversations. So stay tuned. When another topic comes to mind, we'll have this conversation. Until next time, feel free to go to my page and check out the write-up that I did on this. And I hope this was helpful to someone. And I hope this helps someone be able to have closure and have some answers. Because it's very stressful with this when you don't have answers. You're left with a lot of questions. And I hope this was able to give someone closure to be able to pull away from their situation. So, have a blessed day. Shalom.